have like integrity issue and zero tolerance. If a performance issue, we never fire you, and we go through the process, very long process. Also comes to me, and if you tried everything, we make sure employee know that. It's because our company value is care. We really care about employees.
Right.
You cannot do something. You hire this employee this week, and next month you fire them. Does not make any sense.
Right. That's you mentioned about performance. If it's a performance issue.
The performance issue, we still go through a process.
Right.
Make sure manager, VP, and also president, myself, we all need to help them. Until we tried everything we can, we still cannot help you, to improve your performance. We might look around if there's any other open positions for you. Right. And we still cannot find that. Maybe we can discuss, some other solutions. Normally, we do not fire anyone because of their performance.
Right. It's a really happiness company. Happiness all around.
We try, so we try. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That's great. Okay, so along with fundraising being a pain, recruiting being a pain, I think the next one is the most difficult thing is user acquisition. So how do you get people to utilize your product, how to pay you? And so scaling that, I think, is the third hardest thing after fundraising and recruiting. So all three panelists have a ton of expertise in user acquisition and scaling. Rob, Katrina, Vasily, come on down. Moderating our panel is Stefan, who is with the Sandhill Angels. So he's seen a lot of pitches and has a lot of experience with user acquisition as well. All right, thanks, guys.
All right. Hope you're enjoying the afternoon, everybody. By the way, that's Sandhill Angels, but who's counting? Anyway, so yeah, it's all about this panel. It's all about scaling and user acquisition, and I thought we'd just jump right in. I've had some interesting conversations already with the panelists, and my first question really was to Rob from ShareThrough, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your startup, but you're already at Series C, so you've come a long way. And I'd like you to kind of maybe take yourself back to Series A. So you've been scrapping on seed funding for probably a year or two, and now you got your first big check. And Series A is all about sales, making sales, showing that you indeed actually can drive some revenue. So tell us a little bit about what went through your mind back then, and how you maybe what ended up working and not working for you in those days.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with a really quick intro. I'm Rob Fan. I'm a co-founder of a company called ShareThrough. We are in the native advertising space. It essentially is the type of advertising you see in Facebook and Twitter. We provide the software that lets the rest of the internet have those types of ads. My company, as Stefan said, is at a Series C stage now. So we're like 170 employees right now. Offices in London, in Japan, in New York, and Austin. So we're kind of distributed in the kind of on the other half side of scaling. But if I roll it back to my earlier days in Series A, kind of the first challenges of scaling sales. And so our business is our sales is very much a B2B type sale. And so the big question that we have there was how do we scale our sales team and the actual sales org itself? And I think the big kind of inflection point is whether you're hiring, I think Stefan said it the best, whether you're hiring a BD person or a salesperson. The most early stage sales executives are more BD, and that's because you're still searching for product market fit. And so when you're still in that product market fit stage, you don't want someone who's going to have like a sheet they're just going to read off prices. You only have that when you're kind of where we are now, and it's a bit more stable. And so I think that's one of the first kind of inflection points we had of scaling was determining the right types of salespeople that we needed.
All right, thank you. And we'll take it over to Katarina now from Ampush. And you were telling me earlier you work with a ton of pretty well-known, well-funded startups that are in the growth space. And so I'm sure you've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work on the user acquisition side. Maybe you can get into some detail on that.
Sure. So Ampush, what we do in the broadest sense is growth marketing. So we started just doing Facebook advertising, then branched out doing all digital channels and built a technology that combines that. We're about 100 people, 30 engineers, and bootstrapped. What we do, we work with some of the names, Dollar Shave Club, Lyft, Uber. We usually work with companies when they've gotten their first 100,000 customers, which is really hard to acquire, right? It's basic unit economics you have to prove out. But then they hit this plateau and want to get to 1 million. And there are a few themes we see that if you get it right from the beginning will help you a lot down the line. So the first one is really start with your LTV in mind. So what are you actually, in a perfect sense, being able to pay for a customer, and then the average from the start. So what we see a lot of companies do, they have a customer acquisition cost that they can pay on average, but when they go out in the market with direct response marketing, they pay too little for the customers they really want, high LTV customers, they stay, and they pay too much for customers that are actually not loyal or have low quality. So really understanding and de-averaging your customer base is key. I think the second point we see is really focus on prioritization. There are tons of channels out there, right, the digital world. Start with the big ones, right? Get search and Facebook usually. Like if you get them right, you can branch out like ad networks and so on, but like really focus and get 2 or 3 channels right first. I think those are one of the big learnings. And then the third one, especially if you're an early startup, attribution is almost a black hole, right? You can spend 10 years trying to perfect it, or take this 80-20 approach, do some A/B testing, turn on, turn off channel, and then move on for that for a year, and then revisit that again. But I'm not going down on that black hole, I think is another big advice we have.
Okay, thank you. Third is Vasily. Vasily's got a background both from Uber and recently joined Tesla. So you're now in the big leagues, a lot of well-funded efforts behind you. And maybe you can tell us a little bit how you guys approach user acquisition, maybe from a more experimental and scientific perspective, just to see how you bring new users to your brands.
All right, thanks a lot, Stefan. Guys, I'm Vasily. As Stefan just said, I've been with Tesla for the last half a year doing customer acquisition, and 3 years customer acquisition on driver side for Uber before, which again, I obviously hope that you know what Uber is, but you know that acquiring drivers is a lot more difficult than acquiring riders, so it's basically solving the most complex problems that the company had at that time, and I guess still has. So in terms of learnings and in terms of the insights into customer acquisition, I can build a lot on what Rob and Katerina just shared, but 2 main topics and 2 main points I want to develop on is first, depends your approach to customer acquisition and to scaling depends on first who you put in the center. Like there is a company and there is a customer. Actually, that's pretty non-trivial choice. In many cases, you cannot do both, right? Because you have to do both, but approach depends on who you're solving the problem for. If you solve the problem for the company, that's one approach. If you solve the problem for the customer, it's another approach. So let's dive into the company problems, right? If a company wants to scale, and we just talked about Katerina takes company from 100,000 to 1 million, let's say you're at 1 million, you want to go to 10 million, right? So 1 million is a number, 10 million is a number, you need to grow your company by 900% basically in mathematical terms, right? What does it mean? We can link it to like my whole topic of company-based customer acquisition is experimentation. Whenever you launch a product, you need to prove that this is a good product to help your company actually progress towards this goal of 10 million from 1 million. And what does it mean? It means it moves certain metric in a right direction by a certain amount, right? By a certain number of percentage points. And then if you run enough number of experiments in this world, right, you will eventually get this total cumulative gain as it compounds, you will get it up to 900%, so now you're at 1 million, right? That's like, basically, it's not very sophisticated, but it's a numbers-driven mechanical approach, which again, I don't recommend using only this approach, but this approach is a nice one to have in mind, right? Because if you have it, you know that, okay, if I have this experiment 5%, and then if you have enough experiments 5% each, at some point you're gonna make it to 900%, and you're at 10 million, and then you solve another problem to get to 100 million. Second approach, now let's put the customer in the focus, right? Because when we solve this customer acquisition problem for the company and scaling, we didn't really put customer in the center, and like customers don't care for many companies, right? Like maybe for some, like Facebook, like AT&T, there are some network externalities, so I kind of do care if you become a customer. But in many companies, I don't, right? I use the product and I don't care about the effort that the company is taking to scale itself. I'm a customer and I just want to consume the product for myself and I want the product to solve my problems, right? And in this world, so if you look at the problem of scaling from this perspective, then I guess customer approach, customer-focused approach, and customer support comes into the center. And that's a key topic I want to develop on because in the world of customer acquisition, people don't talk about customer support too much. It's more seen as a crutch to a product that we cannot build it all immediately. So let's put customer support here for now as a crutch because we're going to build it later at some point, right? Okay, it's valid, but you can change the whole framework and you can start thinking of customer support as actually a pretty critical function that helps you learn what your customers are still missing, why they choose not to join you yet, why they choose to leave you, and then you can turn those insights into features which you can build, which otherwise none of your experiments or none of your data-driven strategies would ever produce, right? So those probably, I guess, two main approaches and learnings, again, from this years at Uber and now at Tesla, that at least I discipline myself to always think about the problem, and the problem, is it a customer problem or a company problem, right? And then what's the best way, again, what's the best way to solve each? So those, I guess, are the two main learnings.
All right.
And I think just backing off that, there's the taking a scientific approach toward all decisions that you make at an early stage. I think you're afforded that luxury when you're a little bit bigger and you're not as attached to it. But as an earlier stage company, your personal emotions, your personal vision and your ambitions tend to get in the way of your own scientific experiments. That if you're able to detach yourself and think of everything, as Vasily was saying, in a very scientifically driven way, you tend to make the best business decisions along the way. And so I think the best advice that I got was to think of stuff, use the scientific method to kind of iterate your way through your startup and adapt your way to success.
Cool. Well, we talked a minute ago about sort of the difference between sales and biz dev. I think there's another big difference kind of between value-added resellers and sort of like direct sales. And I think a lot of startups have to grapple with that as well. Do you connect to a network of independent salespeople that end up driving business to you, or do you do those sales directly? And I thought Vasily might have an interesting perspective on that because Tesla's really trying to go the direct sales route, and he had some interesting observations in terms of how they do sales compared to the dealerships. And the traditional way of selling cars is through independent resellers. And this is something you may want to think about. I think it's a lot faster to scale with independent resellers, but you pay a price. And Vasily, maybe you can add some points to that.
Thanks a lot, Stefan, for a great question. So I obviously cannot comment on why the company makes those decisions to, say, provide a chain of not gas stations but chargers and chain of service centers on its own. Those decisions are not done by me, but I can at least speculate in this approach that we just discussed, right? The company-focused approach, customer-focused approach. You ultimately want to build the right experience for your customer. If you want to be the world dominant company in the vehicles, and I hope, again, I'm doing my best for Tesla to become an iPhone of vehicles and for all other companies to slowly become basically Android consumers. I guess that's my vision for vehicles. I want something similar to mobile phones to happen in this market. So when you build that type of company, and that's what I believe in, you want to do things right. You cannot believe that somebody else will do it for you. And both Uber and actually Tesla are similar in this, because Uber could just build a network of drivers and say, you guys price your rides yourself, you decide when to go online, offline, and you decide, customers will decide whether they like you or not, right? They could build completely distributed approach and like no driver validation, no pricing, they could give it all to the market. But that's not what Uber has done, right? Uber has centralized it all, centralized pricing, driver validation, customer ratings, like everything to build the best experience for you, to get your ride safe, to get your ride cheap, and to get, again, the best experience for you. I guess in my framework, Tesla is doing the same kinds of decisions because we want to build the right chain of, again, not gas stations, but chargers, because we believe we know better than those random gas station owners where to build the chargers network. And we better know where to build them and how to price them, right, than those guys, because the gas prices are just completely random, and honestly, it's just completely crazy. You can see $250 gas, and then $350 gas, and then maybe $450 gas 1 month. You just drive to LA, and you'll just be pretty confused with like those prices you see. And I don't think it's great for the customer. That's probably why we're building our own chargers. And the service centers, it's probably also why we're building our own service centers, because we don't want you as a customer buying $100,000 vehicle to not have, like, to just be given total randomness of, and rely on Yelp reviews. Is it a good one or is it not a good one, et cetera. We want to be able to give you by far the best experience. It comes at the cost of, yes, we're moving probably slower than if we enabled like 50 other customers, but if you see how fast the chain of chargers grows, how fast the chain of stores and service centers grows, and if you just project it and you don't project linearly because it's going to be growing way, way faster, you'll be amazed how fast this reality is actually coming. So that's probably one of the reasons why vertically integrating everything and not giving stuff away to get your customers the best possible experience is the approach I actually believe in, and I'm happy to work for companies that use this approach.
Cool, thank you. And maybe over to Katarina for a question. And you may have alluded to this earlier, but I really like your comment on building the cost of user acquisition into your business model in some way. And I think a lot of startups may make that mistake. They think by doing a direct-to-consumer business, maybe driving web sales, they don't need to worry as much about a very high margin. So maybe you can comment on that.
Sure, it's something we actually saw with a lot of our customers, or what they've gotten wrong really early on and that pinches them later is, like 30 years ago when there wasn't like this direct-to-consumer trend yet, like most of the startups or new companies had at least 20-30% profit or margin that they gave to wholesalers, to retailers, right, that would portray their products. And that was just part of their business, how they built the product costs in, and they considered that. Now this, let's put a 30% margin, goes away when they think they can go direct to consumer, and the hope is they can go viral or you just have this organic influx. The reality is, though, in most of the cases, that actually they do have, if they hit a certain volume threshold, they have to pay for customers. And direct response marketing is this interesting trend that there is, instead of a volume discount that you find usually everywhere, there's a volume premium. So actually to pay for the 1 million subscriber or customer, you have to pay more than for the first 200,000 subscribers. And a lot of people miss that point, and if they don't project that out or have margin for that, then they later, the unit economics don't work out if they hit a certain size. So we always advise, think about, look at actually like old P&L statements of companies that started 20, 30 years ago and what they put money towards, and think about how that has changed, but also how costs might occur if you are at a certain size, what you need to plan for.
Okay, and maybe another question over to Rob. Tell me about, I know you work with a lot of large companies, managing kind of their ad needs and matching that to the large media properties. What are some of the best practices that maybe an early stage startup can adopt from what these large, very sophisticated companies are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really understanding who their customers are. So a lot of these strategies that these large advertising companies employ are targeting specific people that they believe are the primary audiences that they should be hitting. And I think that is, where some of the big brands have done very well is when they truly understand who their customers are. And I think for an early stage startup, that is the number one thing you should be doing, is understanding who your customers are and understanding the nuances and the differences within your customer, and understanding within, for example, one customer, there is a decision maker who's the actual decision maker. There's the potentially maybe even the doer that is separate from the decision maker but has a large input into them. So really understanding who your customer is and knowing how to target those customers with different marketing messages or just sales pitches goes a long way. And that's what all the big brands are doing, and they do it obviously in a much broader sense. But yeah, at an earlier stage, you can do it at a very kind of specific individual. You can pull up, if you're doing more of a B2B type sale, pull up the entire organization that you're about to sell to, build out their org chart, identify the different people who are there, and then in your first meeting, figure out who are the decision makers, who's the doer, who's the person that might be a big influencer on the decision maker, map them all out, and come up with a plan to hit each one of them with the right messages.
Okay, cool. We were talking backstage a minute ago. I hear a lot of pitches, and I still hear a ton of pitches where user acquisition kind of trumps everything, where they say, hey, first we're going to build a giant audience, and then we're going to start to make money. And you know, as an investor, that doesn't sit that well with me. But I wanted to, you know, I asked backstage. I said, "Hey, is that still a thing? Are startups still succeeding with that, making money? What do you guys think?"
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I've definitely heard, I've kind of done mentoring at these types of conferences as well, and I've heard some of the ideas that start from that perspective too. And I think of what happens, many people often hear the viral or the success stories of the handful, and some of the success stories do often sound like I went for user acquisition and that's all I focused on was growth, and then we figured out how to make money at the end. And that does occur, but those are the unicorns, and that is why they're called unicorns, because they are very rare, and that's not the way to increase your probability of success. And so, you know, as a startup, what you want to do is try and figure out what's the best way to succeed as a company, and typically that involves including a monetization strategy pretty early on.
To what the point Rob just brought, if you think about getting a product out there that will get you revenue sooner, in most cases you also focus more on building the right product. There are extreme cases where like you have to have a certain user base and only then there's value and you can have revenue. But for most of startups, again, it forces like wanting to like not taking investor money just to grow and then figure it out, but taking actually investor money to build something or stay bootstrapped a little bit longer, really focus you being very customer centric, getting out there and building a product what people are willing to pay for.
Okay, so I guess I'm hearing no, it's not a thing anymore, except for a few people, a few very lucky ones. Cool. Well, tell me a little bit about what's going on. What's sort of some of the techniques these days with virality? I mean, as somebody that hears pitches in the consumer space, I'm always looking for, all right, how are they going to get additional customers without necessarily having to spend a ton of money on ads or brand building? You know, ideally, you get your own customers recommending your company to others, so that you get the whole network effect. So, what are some of the biggest techniques out there right now for that?
Well, I think the biggest is like if there's a value add, right? So like in Dropbox is perfect, right? Like if you have somebody share a Dropbox folder and they also sign up, there's more value because you can share documents. So I think virality in itself, if you start with this thinking, I want virality, I think it's a wrong approach. You need to start like, how can I create value for the customer? And that comes with more people. And if you can figure that out, it's perfect, because then the customer acquisition cost, the average cost would just go up, and that's something that works against it. So that's the one thing that can actually keep your average cost of acquiring customer the same or constant.
Yeah, I think for you know, everyone wants to have some type of viral hook that kind of gets you the free customer, and there are some instances in which you could do it, but oftentimes, you know, especially in you know, some B2B type plays, it is not as obvious what the viral hook is. And I think I think the best approach is just to have, you know, really good customer support, a really good product, because the best viral that you can get is word of mouth. And if your customer loves what you do, they can then tell their friends and their peers about you as a solution to the problems, and then it will go viral from there. So it's not necessarily as tangible, but that is the old school way of spreading virality. And in some instances, you know, where you can't build it into the product per se, that is the best way to do it. And that's why investing in customer support early on, it can be a huge factor.
Yeah, those are great answers. Let me see what I can add to it. Maybe one more aspect of virality, you can think of it as just one more channel of customer acquisition, right? You have organic channel where the customers find you in one way or another, which doesn't cost you anything. At least you don't see this cost. You have paid channel of acquisition. Then you can call it like viral channel of acquisition as long as you can measure it and you can see if you can figure out an incentive for those customers to make you more viral, less viral, depending on what incentive you provide, as long as, again, the balance between, as Katerina was mentioning, critical importance of LTV customer acquisition cost. Ultimately, unit economics better be positive if you want to sustainably grow this channel going forward. But in some cases, you really don't want to make it a sustainable channel going forward. You maybe want to like turn a plug of virality for now, and let's say LTV is going to be very low and cost of customer acquisition is still going to be very high, but it takes you to this, like, again, I used 1 million and 10 million customers. Let's say it takes you to 10 million customers, and then VC gives you another big paycheck, and then you can like say, okay, got it, and then you switch it off and you keep going to your next. Again, there is lots of different approaches to this problem, right? Depends on which problem you're solving. If you're solving a problem of raising a next round, maybe you can get an artificial virality in place, right? By creating fake customer incentives and hope that VCs will not figure it out and still give you money. But yeah, sustainably, you better figure out approaches which result in positive unit economics for those viral hooks or loops. In Uber, we did obviously rider acquisition promotions where you got free ride if you invited somebody else who also gets a free ride. And when you're a driver, you also get a huge paycheck after your first ride or after your 10th ride or after your 100th ride. And then we also converted riders into drivers. So there is lots of thought which went into building virality, and it's not just about making your product so cool. It's also sometimes just about money, right? Because people care about money along with many other things they care about.
All right, I really like that idea about turning your riders into drivers. I think that's really out-of-the-box thinking. Okay, well, we're wrapping things up. I wanted to see if you had any questions in the audience. We have a few minutes left. If somebody has a user acquisition scaling question for the panel. No questions. I've got one kind of exit question, or while somebody's thinking of their question. You know, what's sort of the one piece of advice you'd give an early stage startup who doesn't have a lot of money yet in the bank and is trying to show some traction with users? What's sort of the key takeaway you would give them?
For me, it's, you know, you hit upon it when you were asking about you know, using VARs or direct sales team. I think that is essentially asking the question of when do you choose to reinvent the wheel? There are certain things you want to reinvent, but you as a startup do not need to reinvent every single part of running a company. You want to pick and choose where you can get a competitive advantage, and that is where you reinvent. But for the by and large, best practices are best practices for a reason. And if there's some HR practice you feel like you need to reinvent because it will reinforce your culture, then by all means do so. But if you don't need to, don't waste your time.
Yeah, I think figuring out matching the channels to your product, like figuring out what's the biggest value that your product has, and then like what are the channels to get it out there. For some products, like in main market, like creating like big marketing lists or blasts out, like that's a very cost-effective way to get the first customers in. For others, it might not be. So really think about not what are other startups doing in general, but like what really gets the value of my product across the most cost-efficient way.
It's interesting. I've been doing startups a long time ago by Silicon Valley measures, obviously more than 4 years ago. And one advice I learned for myself that you need to deeply internalize that you're fighting the battle where stakes are like way against you. So it's really hard to win in this battle. But with this being deeply rooted into your mindset that you understand this battle is really hard to win, and maybe you will have to, at some point, you might actually have to get into another one. The advice they gave me in the business school, at least they said, if things are not going the way you projected, which happens in pretty much every single case, you do need to have a plan of getting out at some point. And again, some people disagree, but I think it's actually a correct statement that you do need to have a plan that at some point you just give up and you don't keep going, because keeping going in many cases is a wrong strategy. So not to disincentivize you, but like that's the reality, right? So you just need to set it for yourself and decide when it's the right thing to stop doing it, right? It's actually pretty important.
All right, good advice, although it kind of ends on a downer note. What I would say is stop that part and then invent something new and go forth on that path. And if you do enough of those experiments, you'll hit the right one for sure. I think we're probably out of time, right? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So do not underestimate the cost of acquiring users. People don't talk about it enough. And if you have figured out how to acquire users, then you can build a billion-dollar business. I personally, just like Eric, hate this unicorn thing. But Tom of Yapstone is either there or on the way. And he basically is competing with PayPal and Stripe. And I just, the other day, was looking, and one of his investors in the last round is MasterCard. So there's an alignment of what he's doing. And then it said, the #1 enemy of checks. So writing checks sucks. Anyway, Tom from Yapstone, please come on down.
Thank you. My name's Tom Volanti. I am a fellow entrepreneur as well as an investor. And I've been there with the heart palpitations and the roller coaster days, the ups and downs that can happen within just simply a day or two, and the adrenaline rush. I've been there through it all. I founded a company called Yapstone in 1999. We are a online payment technology company, and we focus primarily on marketplaces and sharing economy, as well as certain vertical markets like the property rental market. So we're one of the first to process apartment rents and vacation rental payments. That's how we got our start. And today we're primarily a marketplace sharing economy company, processing for companies like HomeAway and VRBO. Show you a little bit about us.
Payments is enabling commerce. And the interesting thing about what we do is we're not just a set of APIs and letting our partners and customers just go off and figure it out themselves. No. We are there every step of the way to facilitate a transaction and to figure out different problems in their businesses and different flows to create solutions that make it easier for people to transact.
So that was our first sizzle reel from 1999. No, just kidding. We had nothing like that. Just to give you a sense of 1999, how many of you know what Y2K was? And everyone focused on Y2K. All right, that's really showing your age and my age. So Y2K was the big impending doom when we reached December 31st, 1999, going into 2000. Everybody was focused on it. It was the impending death of planes were going to drop out of the sky. The computational grid was going to be completely set to a halt. Just other things. Amazon was only 2 years public. PayPal had only started 1 year in advance, 1 year prior. FinTech wasn't even a word, and social media didn't exist. The iPhone was 8 years away. So that's the environment that I started the company. We've won a number of awards. We've grown very well over the years, but it's a slog. It takes a lot. Obviously, it takes a lot of time. We've been on the Forbes, one of the next billion-dollar companies. We've raised $120 million of equity and $60 million of debt. However, we really bootstrapped the company for the first 11 years, so we weren't awash in venture capital in the beginning. It was completely a little bit of friends and family in '99. Took us, I believe, 5 years to get to $3 million in revenue. This year we'll do around $350 million. But we believed in what we were doing the entire way, even though it took a lot longer than we thought it was going to. And this is really a telling quote. There really are no secrets to success. It's a result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. And one of the things that I learned early on in my 20s was that I was not entitled to success at all. We might have come from good colleges and maybe great jobs coming out of college, but then we become entrepreneurs. We're all here as entrepreneurs and some VCs as well. And there's no entitlement, and there's really no shortcut. There have been a lot of different things that have happened to us. I've been in VC meetings where the VC on the other side was, the first question out of his mouth was, "Why am I here? You're boring me." And just the yawns and the rolled eyes while I'm trying to give a presentation. Does anyone here have an example of somebody kicking them out of the room, or just an example of your idea being rejected? Right there. What's a good example? It just happened. Right. Yeah, so the Airbnb guys, Brian Chesky and his partner, they had a smoothie with a prospective investor early on, and the investor said, "I'll be right back." They're still waiting for that guy to come back. So we're going to get into a little entrepreneurial trivia. So which unicorn startup was rejected by prominent investors all over Silicon Valley before finding a break? All. So I'll give you another hint. These guys designed cereal boxes. Airbnb. There you go. So I'll tell the rest of the story. Airbnb. They designed cereal boxes at the Democrat National Convention. I believe it was Obama O's and Captain McCain. And they designed these boxes. They sold $30,000 worth of these boxes. That was their only revenue at the time. Brian talked to his mom, and she said, "Are you in the cereal business or in the technology business?" And he said, "It looks like we're in the cereal business right now." So really interesting times, very, very humble beginnings by some of the greatest companies. Okay, which famous tech entrepreneurs give each day a specific theme? Jack Dorsey. Someone plant the questions. Yeah, you're pretty good. Jack Dorsey is exactly right. So Jack, as the story goes, will dedicate certain days to marketing and certain days to business development, certain days to product. Now, we all know that might not seem like a reality, and it probably isn't for most of us, but thematically, it's a very, very interesting way to look at things. And to have a purpose when you get up in the morning, try to focus as much as you can, but we can't obviously focus completely on one thing when all sorts of events are happening to take away our attention. But it's actually directionally a really interesting way to go. There's another thing that I do that I read along the way, which is getting up an hour earlier than I normally would to try to do what I set out to do in that hour before even looking at any emails. And a lot of times emails are reactionary, right? It's what other people want you to do, and it takes you away from what you set out to do. So I have found that to be a helpful tool in trying to set my priorities straight and getting some things done right away. Which famous billionaire originally made a program for comparing people's faces online? You can't answer. For completely people's faces, comparing people's faces online and voting, which was better looking before turning to social media. Facebook, exactly. You believe that Zuckerberg actually started the company as FaceMash, which compared looks, and realized that really wasn't going to go a long way. That eventually turned into social media. He found a great partner in terms of how to monetize a great engaging product that he had developed. So these are all really, really great examples of incredible companies that have come from humble beginnings. One of the key things, and what I'd try to leave you with, is some different ways, some different things that I've found are key aspects of building a billion-dollar startup. One is standing the test of time. How can you actually build your company to last? I'm a big believer in not building a company to sell. I believe that to build a truly successful company, your heart has to be in it. You have to be passionate about the product or service that you're developing. If it's just money, the first block in the road will tend to get people to quit if it's just about money. The passion and the belief in the product or service is what's going to carry you through. Uber and Airbnb are transformational businesses. They effectively created the sharing economy. Who would have thought 10 or 15 years ago that you would get into a car or allow your children to get in a car with a total stranger, or find an apartment or stay in an apartment or room with a complete stranger? They have completely unleashed the sharing economy. And ask yourself the billion-dollar question: will my company be around in 20 years' time? And again, it is really all about believing in what you're doing and staying true to that. Another piece that I find critical in building a startup that's successful is innovating around market changes. So if you have any sort of traction, if you have any sort of success, you're obviously going to be around and you're going to see changes in the world. And for us, we saw that things were moving to digital in terms of payments. And Yapstone decided to hone in on a specific market, the rental market.